Our world is one of many strange and fascinating peoples. The tall and lithe frayed, who live in the trees and commune with nature. The brutish and passionate Vorzud, who make for excellent and terrifying warriors. The diminutive Vihi, who harness the powers of our world to make life just a bit better for all of us. The Varaks, who seek knowledge wherever it can be found, and who have crafted the largest repository of knowledge in the world. There are more, but for now I shall leave you with one more, the species to which I belong. I am Screenal, a species of lizard-like beings who pride themselves on our ability to construct great cities in a matter of weeks, and who generally make up the aristocracy of many kingdoms. My name is Fraxel. I am a royal observer, and I have been tasked with a most peculiar job. I am to observe a being that does not exist anywhere else within the known world, one who simply appeared and has, so far, been unwilling to share their origins. My encounters with this being began on the day of my arrival, in the town of Everfell. It's a little town, not too important or noteworthy, beyond plain host of this strange being. Before the being's arrival, it had been a town of habit and schedule. Now the town seemed out of sync with itself, especially whenever the being made his presence known. I had just stepped out of my carriage when I saw them for the very first time, and was immediately struck dumb by their appearance. A black hooded cloak over a tight black suit, no visible skin, and what looked to be glossy, flexible plates that covered what I presumed to be vital areas of the person's body. But most striking was the angular helm that sat upon their head. Save for a few obvious parts of it, it appeared to be made of darkly tinted glass that reflected the world around it perfectly. I could see no hint of a face in the design of the helmet, nor see the face of a living being behind the glass either. Yet I could feel their eyes upon me all the same, a sense of being watched filling me with a sensation of unease. I felt like I was being hunted, and the predator had me in their sight. I wanted to introduce myself, as manners and protocol dictated that I should, and yet I could not find my voice. The being watched me for a moment more, then turned and walked away, a slight swaying to their hips that seemed more feminine to me than anything else about them. I could only stand in shock and watch them go before they slipped out of sight. Once I had regained my senses, I began a circuit through the town, asking about the mysterious being. The townsfolk all told the same story. She, for the being was in fact a she, had shown up nearly a month before my arrival. She did not seek nor cause violence. She had at first sought information. The knowledge she sought was simple and mundane. What life was like, how all the ruling classes treated those beneath them, how often wars were fought, such simple things. The townsfolk, presuming this woman was simply a shorter frayed, had found her questions strange but answered them truthfully enough, or to the best of their abilities. And then she had asked stranger questions. She had offered up a potential scenario. Beings from the sky descending to our world, and raising us up to be equals with them. Many soon began to think she was some sort of missionary, which, in hindsight, I suppose she was, of a sort. The townsfolk, being simple, did not know how to answer such questions, and that was where her questions ended. Instead, she has since spent her days seemingly preparing the town for something unknown and potentially sinister. But all evidence would seemingly point to the contrary, as though she's trying to ensure our safety, our understanding, limited as it might be. I had spent several days in the town before I encountered her again, and when I did, I went on the attack, so to speak. "Excuse me, a moment if you please, kind lady," I said, and I watched as the cloaked figure stiffens slightly, then turns to face me. Up close, I can see that there was more to her than I had first observed. Her forearms, for example, were clad in a strange web of metal, almost like a decorative gauntlet, was only present enough to be classified as something more than mere jewelry. The same for the rest of her body. The metal, at least I thought it was metal, was thin and flexible, more abundant in places that I assumed housed vital organs, yet still managed to accentuate and even highlight her form. A perfect blending of some unknowable function with form and aesthetic. I swear I felt I even detected a pulsating light within the metal, but it could have simply been my eyes playing tricks on me. The woman did not speak. Instead, she stood before me at something close to attention, like when a soldier is being spoken to by a superior officer. I took her silence as a prompt to continue. If I may, I would know your name and your purpose in this town, as well as what species you hail from, for none have encountered any like you before, I asked, doing my best to not sound haughty, though I suspect I failed in that endeavour. She watched me a moment longer, and finally seemed to breathe, if the rise of her chest was evidence of breathing. You may not. My name is not for you to know, but my purpose is to prepare you all for a day that may come soon or much, much later. The voice was wrong. Clearly that of a woman, yes, with a lilting quality to it. Yet it also sounded hollow, like the voice of a golem. My species is human, and that is all you need to know for the time being. Even hollow, her words left me feeling agitated. Didn't she know that I represented royalty? Shouldn't she be more willing to engage in conversation with me, based on that fact alone? Perhaps she did not know and was merely treating me as she would the commoners. I did my best to not allow irritation colour my words. I see. And just what exactly are you preparing us all for? I should warn you that if it is a threat, that we are more than prepared to face and defeat whatever you may set against us. I straightened my back and shoulders, tail lashing at the dirt while my angular chin rose just a bit higher. Again there was silence from her, but I watched as her head shifted downwards, then back up, as though she was sizing up an opponent. With all due respect, no, you are not prepared in the slightest, she stated. And the hollowness in her voice had been replaced with a simple, knowing confidence that left me feeling incredibly unsure of myself and my kingdom's capabilities. This encounter is concluded. Good day, sir. And just like that, any momentum I might have had vanished, as she turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving me dumbfounded. She moved carefully, and though off the town she passed, received soft nods of her head in silent greeting. I did not know what to do or think. Should I pursue her? Threaten her? Or perhaps attempt to provide some sort of monetary means to acquire the information I was sent to retrieve? I had only just made up my mind when I noticed she was nowhere to be seen, and so decided that I might as well take it easy for the rest of the day, perhaps ask around a little more. I decided to discover if she happened to be staying at one of the inns, or outside the town limits. Most did not know, but one surprised me. She's staying in the old cottage on the outskirts of the town, my lord, Avier said, using his natural magical powers to add to her forge's heat. Odd place. Folks who lived there passed on about a month ago, and it's been vacant ever since. It's nice to see the lights up there on the hill again. And which way is this cottage, my good man? Northeast, my lord. Can't miss it, especially at night. For his assistance on that matter, I made sure to slip him a piece of gold, as payment for the knowledge he had provided. It was the least I could do for his aiding of an agent of the crown. I spent the rest of the day pondering my course of action, and decided that perhaps I should do a little covert investigation come nightfall. Stealth may not be my strong suit, but I was sure I could learn something this evening. Night came, and I slipped from the inn which I was staying at, adorned in darker clothes that helped my already dark scales blend a bit better into the darkness. Turning my snout northeast, I began the short trek to the cottage. and was pleased to discover that the forge hand was not lying when he said it was hard to miss. My pace slowed as I left the confines of the town, my body naturally sinking lower and lower, till I was nearly crawling on my hands and feet through the tall grass. Which wasn't necessarily a dignified thing for me to be doing, but necessity almost called for it. Finally, I reached the side of the cottage and slowly rose to my feet, doing my best to not let my claws scrape against the stone walls, while I peered in through a tall window. I didn't expose my entire head, just the crest beneath which my eyes resided, and I got a new look at this human, as she had called herself. She had shed the cloak, which hung from a hook near the door, but she had not removed the helmet, nor the rest of her attire, save for the metal accoutrements, which lay in an orderly manner on the dining table. Wandering around the room, she seemed to be doing rather mundane chores, cleaning mostly, which made sense. Even if her apparent mission did not last too long, she would want her current domicile to be livable and pleasant to a degree. This did not seem sinister at all, and yet the mystery remained. But then things changed and suddenly got interesting, for she stiffened and stood up straighter, holding out a hand with her palm facing the ceiling. Upon it, a figure of light appeared, tiny in comparison to her. They conversed, and yet it was in a language I could not understand. I did my best to try and capture the meaning of the conversation. Whatever they were talking about had set the mysterious woman on edge, agitating her in a way that none had witnessed so far. The conversation came to an end as her fingers curled into a fist, her arm dropping to her side as she heaved a sigh that transcended all species barriers, for it was one I had utilized time and time again when things seemingly just kept going wrong. I could sympathize with that, and it lent this woman a more familiar and understandable air. Before I could muse further, she went stiff again, and her head suddenly jerked towards me, prompting me to duck down out of sight and rush off as quickly as I could. Just as I entered the town, I could hear the distant clatter of the door slamming open, but not the sounds of pursuit, so I was hopefully in the clear. I returned to the inn and secluded myself in my room for the rest of the evening. Mulling over what I had witnessed, I was certain that this stranger was up to sinister deeds of a subtle variety. Something had to be done, but what? I dared not engage her in physical combat, for I knew not her capabilities, nor if she possessed magic, and if she did, how powerful in the arcane art she was. Though the small figure that had appeared over her palm suggested magic of a sort, but nothing like I had ever seen. Before I knew it, I was asleep, and when I awoke I had expected to find myself listening to the dulcet tones of early morning, birds chirping, and people just starting to rise. Instead, I was met with screams of shock and horror, and I watched in mute terror as the roof above my head was peeled away by a tentacle that descended from the heavens. It defied all reason, all sense and comprehension. A dark god sat above our heads, and had come to reap a harvest of mortals. I am not ashamed to admit that I screamed in a less than dignified manner, and rushed to protect myself from the tentacle that curled towards me. My claws sunk into a piece of debris, and though I am no warrior, in the heat of the moment I hefted the heavy piece of old wood with ease, and swung it at the tentacle. It connected with some force, but did little to dissuade the tentacle's inexorable approach. My eyes widened, and I continued to smack at the tendril, hoping that perhaps I could wound it enough to make it reconsider taking me away. But alas, my hopes were dashed, just as it began to encircle me. Whoomp! The sound began as a mere tingle at the base of my skull, then became something more, something that set me on edge. In those few terrible moments where the world had slowed, as I had been about to be trapped, a sapphire beam of light slid into my field of view and swung towards the tentacle. Then, it simply passed through it, slicing the limb apart several times, as it was guided back and forth through the air. An unholy roar escaped the dark god above us, whose body I could now faintly see as it just barely breached the last layers of clouds. With my entrapment postponed, I followed the beam of light to its source, and was surprised to see the woman, the stranger, standing in the street with an arm stretched upwards and pointing towards what had once been an intact tentacle. In her other hand, she wielded a thin sword of pure light, which crackled and hissed with barely restrained energy and magic. Without thinking, I rushed from my room, and further shed any veil of decorum I still possessed, by using the exterior wall to my advantage. I raced to her side, as she calmly walked towards the inn, giving her sword a twirl. "Stranger, there is no glory to be had here. Run! Run and save as many as you can. I beg this of you!" I screamed over the din, reaching out for her suit and clutching it, just below the neck. I caught the raising of her free hand, and expected to be slapped or punched. Instead, she rested a hand upon my arms. Though I could not see her face, I got the feeling that she was trying to be reassuring, which, while considerate of her, was not useful at this time. "Please relax and seek shelter. I can handle this. There is nothing to fear. Kindly release me, if you please," she said. A compulsion that was surely magical in nature, forcing me to do as she bid. I released her, and she stepped past me, and though I think she felt I could not hear it, I heard her utter a strange thing. "This is wrong. I thought we had more time." As I watched, she began moving a little faster, and as I looked up at the sky, I saw her haste was with good reason, for the leviathan of a god was shuddering and shaking itself, shedding small objects from his body that streaked for the land below. They landed with great force, splattering blood and bone around their impact craters, and from them emerged monstrous horrors I had never even dreamed were possible. They screeched and gibbered, attacking any that were unfortunate enough to be within reach. And then she was amongst them, and the hunters became the hunted. She was magnificent, twirling and ducking under blades of bone and maws filled with wicked teeth. That blade of light swept back and forth with deft, easy motions, parting flesh from flesh, and severing bones with terrible ease. From her other arm I saw her metal webbing had morphed, forming what looked to be angular tubes that spun magically around her forearm. Then bolts of sapphire light started to spew from the rapidly spinning tubes, punching holes through the monsters, and where they touched ground or building, they detonated with great force. She swept her arm back and forth, mowing down her foes with an ease only afforded to the divine. And then, a new sound reached us, and I looked up once more, as a horn sounded from the heavens that shook the very ground beneath my feet. The dark god began to rise, a fearful braying leaving it, and I sensed that the gods did not look too favourably upon its intrusion into their domain. My attention snapped away from the Leviathan, as the stranger stopped and held up her hand, a figure appearing over the palm just as it had the night before. They spoke again in that strange tongue, her voice clipped and angry, but not of the figure she spoke to. The figure said something that sounded almost like an order to me, and she nodded, closing her fist and looking back up at the Leviathan of a god. With a final swipe of her sword, she cut down the last beast before raising both hands. The metal webbing around them shifted, becoming pointed stars that glowed with light. My eyesight is leagues beyond that of the other races, and I spotted some sort of beam being emitted by the stars, which reached up towards the dark god and latched on. Around her legs the same happened, except they anchored themselves to the ground, which flexed and cracked in places, as though some great force were pulling at it. A grunt of exertion left her, as she was jerked forward suddenly, but she did not falter, nor allow herself to be pulled away from her spot. Instead, she pulled her arms back, groaning as she did, and to my amazement, the dark god moved with her, pulled back down towards the ground by a small amount. I doubted she could keep it from fleeing for long, but I doubted she meant to hold it still indefinitely. She was merely delaying it, but for what purpose? A barb shattered part of her helmet, sending pieces of jagged broken glass flying as she let out a cry and lashed out with a hand. I watched in stunned awe as the beast that had harmed her was suddenly crushed by the nearly invisible force she created. Then she focused fully on the dark god, which had managed to slip just a bit further away. But she pulled it back, and I moved to her side, wondering if I could be of some use. I finally got a look at her in the process, and was surprised to find she bore no scales upon her features, which were blunted like that of the frayed. Yet where they were almost all exclusively pale of flesh, hers was darker, almost the same tone as the bark of a tree. Yet she was clearly not some sort of plant-based being. She was flesh and blood like myself. Yet as I watched, I could see her flesh starting to decay, causing her to hiss and glance at me with shining blue eyes. "Pouch! Left side! Grab the can and spray it on my helmet! Quickly!" she rasped. And I leapt into action, finding this can thing, and after accidentally spraying a mist of something into the air, did as she asked. The mist became a puddle of grey liquid upon her helmet. Then it moved over to the damaged area and became more glass, sealing her helmet up instantly. "Good, thank you. Now step back. The cavalry is here," she said. Her voice once more filtered through the helmet. She released the dark god and stepped back several paces, with me following as a rumble started in the sky. I had only just turned my gaze to the Leviathan when the world went dark, but not because the sun had vanished, but as a beam of crackling red light shot down from the sky and speared through the dark god, which screamed in agony. More beams lanced through it, then converged upon the first. As I watched, a pulse went through the much larger beam, and upon making contact with the Leviathan, it exploded with such fury and wrath that I swore I had just witnessed the gods smiting their greatest foe. The dark god fell to the earth, impaling itself upon a mountain. And then the gods erased the mountain, more beams of light sweeping it away with ruthless efficiency. I looked to the stranger, this woman who had brought the god's wrath down upon such a terrible foe. "Who are you? Will you be all right?" I asked. And she looked at me for a long moment, just as a new shadow darkened the sky, and she looked up. I followed her gaze, and saw a thing of metal descend to hover over us, sleek lines and hard angles. It was the single most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever seen. "We hoped we would have more time before this discussion took place, but the Necessi have forced our hand this day," she said with a sigh, her head hanging for a moment. "I will be all right. Your air is poison to me, thus the helmet and the suit. But I will be all right. We will adapt eventually." She sounded tired, and I could not fault her for that. But to answer your question... She paused, searching for the right words. "I am the herald of humanity, and we wish to welcome you into a world beyond imagining."